Okay, great.
Okay, so tell me about yourself and your involvement in the British film industry.
Well, I've been involved in the British film industry for getting on for 3 decades now or more. I began working with Birmingham Film Workshop in Birmingham in the late 70s, and then progressed to investing into feature films while I was running MIDA in Liverpool, and then I had a number of years at the British Film Institute and the UK Film Council as head of the production funding department. And in that time, been associated with over 20 UK feature films as either a funder or financier or an exec producer, that kind of role.
So as a producer, do you find genres a valid approach to filmmaking, and why?
Well, producers like working in genres because by having a genre in a film proposal, they can easily gauge what we call the marketability on the one hand and the playability of the film on the other. I mean, by marketability, we mean will that film proposal appeal to the financiers, the funders, the distributors that might get behind a project. So that's really marketing to the industry. But by playability, what we mean is that once completed, that film will play with an audience, will appeal to an audience. And a genre, by its very nature, by having built-in conventions, expectations, etc., it's an easy exchange between the producer and an audience, or the producer and the industry. It's a set of conventions that everybody understands, and from the very beginning of film, genres have been there for audiences to enjoy and to be entertained by.
Hollywood genre versus British genre, what are the main differences?
Well, I think the American genres are mainly in the control of the big studios, and those genres we will probably say are science fiction, action films, thrillers, adventure movies, usually movies with large, big budgets. But they still work within storytelling conventions that those genres adhere to. In the UK, we're talking about lesser funded films. But I think we can say that there are a number of particular British genres. For example, the comedy genre. And in Britain, the comedy genre is really continuing the tradition of musical vaudeville and slapstick. I mean, you can see that in the movies of, say, Mr. Bean, and even comedies like Bridget Jones. But there's another 2 types of genres, I think, that we have in Britain that are kind of characteristic of Britain. The first is what I would call the social realism genre. Sometimes it goes under the name of kitchen sink. And these are films that really came to the fore in the 60s when filmmakers found that stories and the backdrop of northern life was really, an attractive proposition to audiences, particularly audiences abroad. So, directors like Ken Loach, producers like Tony Garnett, they really put social realism movies from the UK on the map. But I think the third one is really films of fantasy and magic. And here I would say that the franchises like The Lord of the Rings, written originally by Tolkien, and the Harry Potter stories written by J.K. Rowling, they offer a kind of retrospective look at a Britain that maybe it didn't exist, maybe it did exist, but it's in the past now, and it's like full of the history of public schools, or in Tolkien, a kind of pre-industrial period. But they're full of fantasy and full of magic. Narnia is another example of that type of movie, and I think we explore those in the UK very well, and they export well.
And what about for young British filmmakers? Can they tap into those genres?
Well, I think some young directors have worked on those genres. For example, the director David Yates, he's really been the person that's driven the last 4 Harry Potter films as a director, and relatively young as well, in his 40s. But there is another kind of approach to genre that younger British directors have been getting involved with, and that's something that's called the twisted genre. And that's where you have 2 or 3 recognisable film genres working together in the same film. So there are expectations of a certain genre, but then because you're using another genre, it kind of sends the expectations in unpredictable ways. And that's really a way of refreshing a genre. It's like buffing it up again or repolishing it for further use. So in that, I would say films like London to Brighton by Paul Williams and This Is England by Shane Meadows are examples of that. In London to Brighton, you have a story about two young girls on the run, running away from an abused background, but they hit a set of gangsters, and then it becomes a gangster film. But both the runaway film and the gangster film are changed by the fact that they're in the same plot together. It's like chemistry, you know, once you put one ingredient with another, you get something different, and that's how twisted genre works. In the case of This Is England, you basically got a subculture movie set amongst skinheads. This is the film by Shane Meadows. So you've got subculture movies amongst skinheads, and then you've got the growing up, the rites of passage of the young boy who ends up joining the gang. It's really then a fish out of water story about growing up, getting used to the kind of codes and what that gang does. But you get also all the stuff about what skinheads were like, their music, their fashions, how they kind of hung out together. And it mixes both together and you get something new from that. And that's what's really the twisted genre. And British younger directors have really been working that very effectively.
What is particular about the way the British film industry uses genre then?
Well, I think the British film industry is able to use the genres of these, as I said, these large franchises, you know, because it makes it known that Britain has this enormous backdrop of writers that can write this kind of material. Those franchises also fill the studios enormously, so there's jobs for technicians. But they're very exportable ideas, as if you ever go around the world, there will be a Harry Potter movie playing somewhere, or a Lord of the Rings. But on the other hand, British directors have been able to, you know, play with the genres, make them their own in different ways. You know, I think the Bridget Jones stories are like that. They're kind of a romantic comedy, but you know, she never gets her man. You know, romantic comedies are usually, you end up with a sweet ending, but the Bridget Jones stories are quite sour romantic comedies. I mean, they're more like romantic tragedies than comedies. And we're able to do that. And I think in a way that, say, American studios wouldn't be prepared to be as risky with the genres as in Britain we are able to. Because often the enormous amounts of money in America that they put into movies isn't at risk in the UK, because we're actually making films on lower budgets. And also, I think we're probably, by playing with the genres, we're actually repolishing them, we're finding new ways in which they are appealing to audiences.
So, as a producer, which films have you made that have used genres?
Well, not a lot actually, I think. Most of the films I've been associated with have been what I would call a kind of personal vision film. I mean, that may even be a genre of its own. That's where a writer-director has carved out a storyline that's an original one. But I mean, I think a lot of those films I may have been involved with have got elements of the genre in them, or they've been adaptations. But I think they've mainly been a personal vision film, whether that's a film, say, by Terence Davis, who I worked with at the BFI, or the guys who made Lawless Heart, which was a portmanteau film, or Nicola Bruce, who made I Could Read the Sky. I couldn't really slot them into the genres that we know can sort of categorise, you know, the romantic comedy, the thriller, the horror, the zombie movie. I mean, obviously the zombie movie is the most current and over familiar and perhaps overused genre that we have on our screens. But that might reflect how teen stories, like in Twilight and The Hunger Games, have become so resonant with young people. You know, lots of young teenage girls in the main are reading these stories, and then obviously producers will make a movie from them because they know the fan base is there anyway. And these stories are really based around, you know, the continuation of the zombie genre. Not to my own taste, but obviously I'm not a teenager anymore.
So for young British filmmakers, Do you think that they can continue to exploit genre?
I think British filmmakers can exploit genre, and I think I think British filmmakers are probably at the forefront of making genres even more accessible to audiences. It's a moot point whether the funders of film in the UK should explore completely original ideas, by a writer-director that wants to be non-generic, that just wants to kind of come up with something different. Whereas often, people tend to look upon the genre as an example of the mainstream industry and perhaps offering too safe an option artistically and creatively because it's working with formula and conventions. But I think that it's important to never forget the fact that you want an appeal to an audience. You want an audience to see your film. And if you pursue your own personal vision, you can sometimes be waiting a decade or more for the audience to kind of become more interested in your film. Or a director might just give up on those types of films and suddenly realise that, making a zombie film might make, my living. I mean, I have an interesting anecdote in that, which is a friend of mine as a producer who had made some very interesting low-budget films, found that he couldn't pursue those films any further because no one was backing him. He took a short-term job producing the TV series The In-Betweeners. He wasn't happy doing that because he didn't want to work in telly, he wanted to work in film. But the producers of The In-Betweeners wanted to make a movie. They asked him to produce it. He produced a teen movie, The In-Betweeners, and now his bank balance has got £1 million in it. So should he go down, would he have gone down that direction if he'd have stayed making, quiet, small, low-budget burners, films that sleep for a while and then take off? But now, his name is, he's the exec producer of The In-Betweeners, and not a bad credit to have in today's austerity world.
Thanks very much, Roger.
Thank you.
Very interesting.